It was just another routine traffic stop, or so Officer Daniels thought. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the quiet suburban street as he flicked on his patrol car's flashing lights. The black sedan in front of him slowed and pulled over, its driver complying without hesitation. Daniels stepped out, adjusting his hat and walking up to the vehicle with the calm confidence of someone who'd done this 100 times before. But what happened next would change everything. As he approached the window, he saw the driver, a black woman in her late 30s, her expression calm but her eyes sharp, almost piercing. She handed over her license and registration without a word, her demeanor cool and collected. Daniels ran her information, his mind already shifting to the next call. But then something unexpected popped up on his screen. A warning, a flag, something that made him pause. He glanced back at her, his tone shifting from professional to suspicious. "Step out of the car, ma'am," he said, his voice firm. She complied, but there was something in the way she looked at him. A quiet confidence, a hint of something he couldn't quite place. Little did he know, this wasn't just any traffic stop, and she wasn't just any driver. The tension in the air was palpable as Daniels began his routine questioning. He asked her where she was headed, why she was in this part of town, and if she had anything in the car she shouldn't. Her answers were short, direct, and unwavering. But the more she spoke, the more Daniels felt like he was missing something. There was an authority in her voice, a presence that didn't match the situation. Still, he pressed on, determined to do his job. He ran her name through the system again, double-checking for warrants or priors. Nothing came up, but something still didn't feel right. He decided to detain her just until he could figure out what was going on. She didn't resist, but as he placed her in the back of his patrol car, she gave him a look that sent a chill down his spine. It wasn't anger or fear. It was almost pity, like she knew something he didn't. Days later, Daniels found himself in court, preparing to testify in a different case. He sat in the hallway, going over his notes when the doors to the courtroom swung open. He looked up, and his heart stopped. Walking into the room, dressed in a sharp black robe, was the woman from the traffic stop, but she wasn't there as a defendant or a witness. She was there as the judge. Daniels felt the color drain from his face as their eyes met. She gave him the same calm, knowing look she had in the car, and in that moment, he realized just how badly he'd misjudged the situation. The room seemed to spin as he tried to process what was happening. How could this be? What did this mean for him? And more importantly, what was going to happen next? The gavel struck, and the room fell silent. But for Daniels, the storm was just beginning. Daniels sat frozen in the courtroom, his mind racing. He couldn't tear his eyes away from Judge Evelyn Carter as she took her seat behind the bench. Her presence commanded the room, her sharp gaze, sweeping over the attorneys, the jury, and finally lingering on him for just a moment longer than necessary. It was as if she was reminding him of their encounter, of the way he'd treated her just days ago. His stomach churned. He had detained her, a judge, on a traffic stop. How had he not known? How had he missed the signs? He replayed the moment, in his head, the way she had handed him her license, the calm but firm tone in her voice when she answered his questions. She hadn't said a word about who she was, hadn't pulled rank or tried to intimidate him. She had simply let the situation play out. And now, here she was, sitting in judgment over the very system he represented. The case he was there to testify in felt trivial now, almost laughable. A petty theft, a routine arrest. But as he sat there, waiting for his name to be called, he couldn't focus. His mind kept drifting back to the traffic stop, to the way he'd handled it. Had he been too harsh, too quick to assume? He prided himself on being fair, on treating everyone the same, but now he wasn't so sure. The look she had given him in the car, that quiet, knowing look, haunted him. It wasn't just about the traffic stop. It was about something bigger, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. And now, sitting in her courtroom, he felt like a man standing on thin ice, waiting for it to crack beneath him. When his name was finally called, Daniels stood, his legs feeling like they were made of lead. He walked to the stand, his uniform suddenly feeling too tight, too heavy. He swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. But the words felt hollow. As he began to testify, he could feel Judge Carter's eyes on him, watching, analyzing. Her expression was unreadable, but he could sense the weight of her scrutiny. Every word he spoke felt like it was being measured, judged. He stumbled over his testimony, his usual confidence faltering under her gaze. The defense attorney noticed, pouncing on his hesitation, but Daniels barely registered the questions. All he could think about was the woman behind the bench, the woman he had detained, the woman who now held his fate in her hands. When the hearing finally ended, Daniels practically bolted from the courtroom. He needed air, needed space to think. But as he stepped into the hallway, he heard a voice behind him. Officer Daniels. It was her. Judge Carter. He turned, his heart pounding, and there she was, standing in the doorway of the courtroom, her robe billowing slightly as she moved. She didn't look angry, but there was a seriousness in her expression that made his stomach drop. "A word, please," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. He nodded, following her into a small private chamber off the main hallway. The door clicked shut behind them, and for a moment, there was only silence. Judge Carter didn't. She stood by the window, her arms crossed, her gaze fixed on him. "Do you know why I didn't tell you who I was during the traffic stop?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. Daniels shook his head, unable to find the words. "Because I wanted to see how you would handle it," she continued. "I wanted to see if you would treat me the same way you treat everyone else." Daniels opened his mouth to respond, but she held up a hand, stopping him. "I've been a judge for over a decade, Officer Daniels. I've seen a lot of things in this system, good and bad. And one thing I've learned is that the way people act when they think no one is watching tells you everything you need to know about who they really are." She paused, letting her words sink in. "So tell me, Officer Daniels, who are you?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting. Daniels felt like the walls were closing in. He wanted to explain himself, to tell her that he was just doing his job, that he didn't mean any disrespect. But the look in her eyes told him she wasn't interested in excuses. She wanted the truth. And the truth was, he didn't know how to answer her. He had always thought of himself as a good cop, a fair cop, but now, standing in front of her, he wasn't so sure. Had he been fair? Had he been just? Or had he let his biases, his assumptions, cloud his judgment? He didn't. No, and that uncertainty terrified him. Judge Carter studied him for a moment longer, then sighed. "I'm not here to punish you, Officer Daniels," she said, her tone softening slightly. "But I am here to make you think, to make you question. Because if we're going to fix this system, if we're going to make it better, we need people who are willing to look in the mirror and ask themselves the hard questions." She turned back to the window, her gaze distant. "You have a choice to make. You can either learn from this or you can keep doing what you've always done, but know this. The next time we meet, it won't be in my courtroom, it'll be in yours, and I'll be watching." With that, she turned and left the room, leaving Daniels standing there, his mind reeling. Her words echoed in his head, each one a hammer blow to his carefully constructed sense of self. He didn't know what to do, where to go from here. But one thing was clear, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As he stepped back into the hallway, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that every move he made from here on out would be under scrutiny, and he had no one to blame but himself. The days that followed were a blur. Daniels tried to go back to his routine, to focus on his work, but he couldn't shake the encounter with Judge Carter. Her words haunted him, creeping into his thoughts. At the most unexpected moments, he found himself second-guessing every decision, every interaction. Was he being fair? Was he being just? Or was he just going through the motions, blind to his own biases? He didn't know. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized how little he truly understood about the system he was a part of. Then one evening, as he was finishing up his shift, he got a call. It was from his supervisor, and the tone of his voice immediately put Daniels on edge. "We need to talk," the man said, his words clipped and serious. "Meet me at the station." Daniels' heart sank. He had a feeling he knew what this was about, and as he drove to the station, his hands gripping the wheel tightly, he couldn't help but wonder if this was the beginning of the end. What had Judge Carter done? What had she said? And more importantly, what was going to happen to him? When he arrived, his supervisor was waiting for him, his expression grim. "Sit down, Daniels," he said, gesturing to a chair. Daniels obeyed, his heart pounding in his chest. "We've received a complaint," the man continued, his tone heavy, "about your conduct during a recent traffic stop. The details are concerning." Daniels felt the color drain from his face. He knew exactly what this was about. But before he could say anything, his supervisor held up a hand. "This isn't just about the traffic stop, Daniels. This is about your record, your history. There's a pattern here, and it's not a good one." Daniels opened his mouth to protest, but the words caught in his throat, because deep down he knew. He had always known. And now it was all coming to light. As he left the station that night, his future uncertain, Daniels couldn't help but think about Judge Carter's words. "You have a choice to make," she had said. And now, standing on the precipice of that choice, he realized just how much was at stake. This wasn't just about his career. It was about who he was, who he wanted to be. And as he walked to his car, the weight of that realization pressing down on him, he knew one thing for certain. This was far from over. The storm was just beginning, and he had no idea how he was going to weather it.